Hello, and welcome to the Smile Revolution Show. I'm Princess Wow, and we raise awareness to the healing power of a genuine smile. It's a project I started many years ago, and it still continues on my mission. I'm going to read just a little bit here from a book called The Healing Power of Humor, and then I'm going to give you this is my 201st show since 2020. And I had a radio show years ago. And so anyway, I just want to read a little bit before I give you my bio of my guest, who I'm excited about tonight, Jeff Slate. The Healing Power of Humor by Alan Klein. Let's see, Dr. John Diamond believes that smiling, or even looking at a smile, gives us what he calls life energy. We've always known, says Diamond, how beautiful and beneficial a smile is. Now we can actually demonstrate the therapeutic value of smiling. In his book, Your Body Doesn't Lie, he states that smiling helps strengthen the thymus gland, an important contributor to a healthy immune system, because the zygomaticus major, those smile muscles, and the thymus gland are closely linked. Anyway, let's see. And here I have my smile button here. Okay, so let's see. If you're watching this live, happy St. Patrick's Day. And if you're not, if you're watching on demand, okay. Well, anyway, for people who are watching live. All right, so Jeff Slate, first of all, I just want to say most of you may know that he's an authority on Bob Dylan and was one of the rare journalists to interview Bob Dylan. And he is known as a world-class frontman and songwriter on the New York City music scene. He came up in the mid-'80s U.S. East Coast post-punk scene, playing CBGBs and other legendary clubs as singer, guitarist, and principal songwriter of the Mindless Thinkers, named by Steve Jones of the Sex Pistols. By early 90s, Slate was a solo artist working with The Who's Pete Townshend, touring with Sheryl Crow, and founding the mod-influenced band The Badge. He shared the stage with Roger McGuinn, Jeff Tweedy, Willie Nile, Margot Price, and toured with Jacob Dylan Wallflowers in 2024, as well as headlining the Woody Guthrie Center and the opening of Bob Dylan Center, and much more. I'm condensing this a little bit. He's also a noted music journalist and has written liner notes for albums by Roy Orbison, The Beatles, Bob Dylan, The Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, and more. He co-authored 2017 book, The Authorized Roy Orbison, with the late legend's sons, and Guitar, the memoir of guitar slinger Earl Slick from 2014, which can be found on Amazon in the US now, I just checked, and Amazon in Canada, so it's amazon.ca, and in the UK, if you're watching from the UK. And there was also an audiobook, and the paperback recently came out, but you can pre-order it on the amazon.ca in Canada, I saw. And for those of you in England, it's the paperback is in the bookstores too. So anyway, oh, hi, everybody. I haven't, okay. Hi. Let's see. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, I'm just checking on my messages here. Okay. Hi. Thanks all for coming. I appreciate it when people come live. Okay. All right. So anyway, here goes the interview. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Princess Wow.
It's good to see you. You can call me Mindy, Princess Wow, or Wow, whatever you want.
Okay. Wow.
People pick whatever. It's fine.
Wow.
Yeah, it was given to me years ago. So anyway, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. So I always start with how I met my guest.
Okay.
Okay, so I have to tell you, years ago, I've heard your name for years because of Ginger Broderick.
Oh, okay, sure.
You probably don't know this, but yeah, I've been on her show too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. and Maureen de Pietoso.
Yep.
So
Yep. Yep.
Maureen's a
Yep.
dear friend. Yeah. So I would hear your name over and over. It's like I'm very good friends with Maureen
Oh, interesting. Great.
and Ginger. Yeah. So anyway, and then you and I met again. Well, then we met through Willie Nile
Right.
when you opened at the Falcon.
I did. That's right.
Remember?
Yep.
And then we reconnected through Earl Slick.
This is correct.
Okay. So we have like a history.
All our musical connections.
Right. So it's kind of like it was just inevitable.
It was going to happen. It was going to happen.
At some point. So
Yeah.
anyway, so since we're starting off talking about Slick, I call him Slick, right? Is that what you call him?
Yep.
That's what he prefers, at least anyway. So I asked, he wanted me to ask you, how did you meet and when?
Our paths crossed once or twice in the 80s, but it wasn't meaningful. It was just sort of at events or things. But so I guess it was maybe back in 2009. I was starting to, I'd taken a couple of years off because I was raising my kids, and I was starting to think about what my next steps in music were. And, my band had sort of run its course for many reasons. And I thought, I had a couple of tracks demoed, and I played them for this drummer friend of mine who, and he played on the tracks. And I said, I really hear Earl Slick on this. And he said, well, just ask him. Right. And I don't, it had probably even been at that point, 15, 20 years since we'd seen each other. So, I just looked him up and found an email address and sent him a request with my phone number. And he called me up and he said, send me the track. And so I sent him the track and he said, oh, I like this. This is cool. So we set up a time at a recording studio. And he came down, and, I think for both of us, it was just, he was somebody I always wanted to work with, but it was one of those situations where immediately we clicked. It was one of those things where we were on the same wavelength. And I remember this really great moment where we'd done some recording, done some overdubs, and he was going to do a solo. And, he went through and did the solo, and it was really amazing. And he said, okay, let's hear it, to the engineer. And he said, oh, I thought you were just rehearsing. And he hadn't recorded it. And, Slick was pretty upset. You're always, you're always rolling. And so I took him outside. I said, oh, let's go have a smoke. So we went outside and hung for a little bit. And we went back in, and he said, there's very few people who can just sort of diffuse a situation like that. It was just, I knew exactly what happened. I didn't want him to strangle the engineer, and I knew he could do it again. And it was, from there on, it was very, it just became this very easy relationship. We just sort of fell into each other's lives. But that was, more than 15 years ago now.
Right. Yeah.
So. Yeah, a lot of other stories since then, but that's the origin story, I suppose.
Okay, great. Well, that's great. So how did it, okay. So before the pandemic, you were doing, what were you doing? You were doing, a project with him. You're on tour with him, with Double Fantasy.
Oh yeah. Wow. Sure. So, yeah, we had been asked to go out by this sort of group of people. There's a promoter involved and a guy who'd written a book about John Lennon. And, he had corralled some of the people who were involved in the Double Fantasy sessions. I think Jack Douglas and this author and, a couple of other people. And he asked if Slick and I would go out and do, before they did the sort of round table discussion and audience Q&A, could we play like half an hour, 45 minutes of music and then afterward play it. So we got a band together and we came up with a set list and an idea for it. And we were pretty excited. It was going to be, I guess was it fall? I guess fall of 2009. No, it was fall of 2020. So it would have been John's 80th birthday. It would have been built around that. And we were going to make a record, we were going to make an album so that we would have something to sell at the events. And, they were talking, they had a really nice, I think it was mostly going to be universities and things like that, because they have nice auditoriums and a built-in crowd. And also, they're easy to deal with from the promoters' purposes. Anyway, we were geared up, and then obviously the pandemic hit, and but it was very much like put a pin in this, because nobody really knew what was going to be happening by September, October, November. In the very early days, it didn't really feel like it was maybe going to last that long. Right. And so in the interim, I thought, well, we were going to make a record, and we can't make one right now, but I'm just going to start here in, I have a little recording studio here. I'm just going to start here. And as time went on, it became very obvious the tour wasn't going to happen. And they did hold the dates for a very, very long time, but I think they didn't let them go until June. But it was already obvious, we weren't going to be going out on the road. So I just started building up tracks here, and we ended up recording, or at least the beginnings of my album that came out last year, that way. I mean, it was going to be a Slick and Slate album, but it was impossible to really meaningfully collaborate during the pandemic. It was more like I would write some songs, send them around, to the guys in Paul Weller's band or Noel Gallagher's band. They put some drums on them and various instruments, and then I'd get them to Slick, and he would add some guitar, and and then eventually, because the project dragged on, everybody got vaccinated and whatever, and he and I were able to go up to a studio in Connecticut where the producer was based.
The clubhouse?
Yeah, no, in Connecticut. In
Connecticut.
Dirt floor recording, and work in person. That was how we really finished it. Because up until then, it was very skeletal. But when you're in a room with people, it's much easier. And so then it was that, but then the pandemic ended, and everybody's records were coming out, and the label was very much like, hang on, because if we put it out now, it's just going to get lost. And so we waited a good year, I think, before it actually hit the streets.
With Schnitzel Records in London.
That's right.
Yeah. Oliver.
Yes. Old people.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it came out May 2024, right?
Correct. And there were a bunch of singles that led up to it. There was a track that was kind of unfinished, and I was going to dump it. And Dave Stewart, who'd become a buddy of mine, called me up one day. It was during the pandemic, and so everybody was just around. Right. And, he's like, "What are you working on?" And I told him the story. I had this track that I just couldn't kind of wrap my brain around. And he said, "Oh, send it to me. I'll fix it." And he did. It was really amazing. It was a lot of, Duff McKagan played on it. Ron Blair.
I know, it's amazing. All the musicians on there.
Yeah. Well, but you know what? It was a time when everybody was just
home. They were home. Yeah. And everybody wanted to do something. Yeah.
Anybody who had a studio or access to, at home or an access to a studio, they were more than happy to do something. So it's very cool. Yeah.
Well, I love the album, I have to say. I'm a big fan. And I just I keep listening to your songs over and over. And,
that's great. That's great.
Yeah. No, I really love it. And also your concerts in person. I mean, you're so good, and your concerts are amazing.
Thank you.
I just have to say that because I am a big fan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
when I can come, when I'm available, I'm coming.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. We play a lot, and we play certainly a lot in the Northeast, so it's easy enough to catch us.
Yeah. So it's great. So you have a concert coming up. The tickets just went on sale.
Yeah, that's true. So we had a residency here in Manhattan and Chelsea for, God, almost 15 years, but more than 10 for sure.
Oh, uh-huh.
And it was almost monthly. I mean, it started off monthly, and then after the pandemic, it was more like 6 or 8 times a year. But really, really regularly. And it just felt like it had run its course. People, for many reasons, it just felt like it had run its course. So I just asked around to some musician friends, like, where do you recommend? And the next thing I knew, I'd heard from the people at Cafe Wah, which is a very famous
Right,
Greenwich Village landmark,
right.
and the guy who books it was full of energy and ideas, and he wanted me to come down to see the space because I hadn't played there. Probably the last time I played there was '93, so it was pretty, it was it was pretty grim back in '93. And now it's really nice. They've renovated it. There's a really beautiful backstage, a green room, and they've got booths and professional. The stage is much nicer, and the equipment is great. And so I was really impressed. So we're testing it out in, I guess the first show is May 4th. It's going to be kicking off Bob Dylan's birthday month. We're going to
Right.
do a Wilburys themed show.
Which is great.
Yeah, people love it.
People love them. Yeah.
And we're going to do it on a Sunday afternoon because it's May and people will be looking for things to do on it's like, I think it's 6 o'clock. So it's evening, so Sunday evening.
Uh-huh.
And, we'll sort of, the idea is then to do one every month. And
Oh,
we've mapped it out for basically through, I think, February next year. And maybe they're dipping their toe into doing cruises as well. We might do a cruise for them. So yeah,
oh,
it's a good relationship already. The people are very, very nice and very, very professional, and
that's
just a
great.
pleasure to deal with. Yeah. So, and they seem to be they really get behind their shows, which is nice.
So you're going to be doing different, like you're starting with the Traveling Wilburys because of
Right.
Dylan's birthday, and then you're going to do different
Yeah.
bands.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, like you
sort of
always do.
thematically, my shows are always a mixture of, even if it's like a Bob Dylan show, we don't do all Bob Dylan music. We'll do some
Okay.
songs of mine that are inspired by Dylan or George Harrison or Tom Petty, and we'll do,
Okay.
some songs, maybe by artists that Bob Dylan loves or that inspired Bob Dylan. We try to keep it thematically, there's an idea, but we keep it fresh because otherwise, people come expecting to see you with a wig and, the harmonica thing and whatever. And that's we're just a rock and roll band. We get out there and we play our own version of these songs, and we try to, keep it different every night. I mean, the song, the guy was asking me, we had coffee the other day, and he's like, well, how many songs do you guys know? And I said, I bet we know over 500. I mean, we have a huge repertoire of
Yeah.
music because, I mean, any of those guys, if you know even the hits of just the guys I mentioned, you've got a lot of material. So we do, like at Christmas time, we do Merry Keithmas. So
Right.
we do Keith Richards solo songs. We do some Stones. We do Muddy Waters. We do Hank Williams. It's like but it's a party because it's Keithmas. So
Right. Right.
so that's the idea.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. So, okay, so you're going to do every month there
Yeah,
at
that's the
at the tip.
idea.
That's exciting. Yeah, that's really cool.
It is.
Okay, so wait, we have to go back to so we're talking about Slick.
Sure.
Okay, so I have to talk about the book.
Sure. Happy to.
Yeah. So, which I love this book. You're such a great writer,
Thank you.
and I just love the way you put it all together and just everything. It's just such a great book, and the pictures, everything. I'm sure you didn't put the pictures together, but anyway,
Nope.
the way you put it together and everything is just, it's so easy to read.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. And
I mean, the idea always when you are helping someone write, particularly a memoir, is to capture their voice. And I think, that's always the tricky part because, you don't necessarily, you're not necessarily able to spend a lot of time with the subject. But, Slick and I have known each other a really long time, and we're very close too. So,
right.
So I know the way he speaks and the way he thinks and the way he talks and responds to certain
Right.
things. So like if he was telling me a story, even if it was from 1974, I knew the way he would react in that situation. It makes it
Right.
much, much easier to capture that person's voice. So it doesn't just feel like a list of stories.
Like you're just reading about somebody's life.
Yeah,
No,
I
no,
mean,
because
and I very much tried to keep it in, in the language he uses and the way he talks and very much his attitude, which I think is
you
very,
definitely
very
did.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely did. I feel like I'm with him when I'm reading the book.
Well, that's the idea.
Yeah, no, it is. You definitely
yeah,
did because it's like the way he talks, the way everything is. It's definitely him.
it's definitely
And
him,
so
yeah.
only you could have done this because you're such good friends.
Yeah, and I think we didn't realize that. I think that's the thing when you're doing it. I was certainly trying to achieve that.
Right.
But I think, when you get close to a project and you're trying to get it to the finish line and all those things, you lose sight of those things. It becomes the nitty-gritty. And it wasn't until a while after it was released and we started getting feedback from people like you and other people who know him.
Right.
And were able to say, oh my, I can't believe you had a writer with you on this. This just sounds like you. And I think that's,
exactly.
that's obviously very flattering for him because he wants it to be that, but I wanted it to be that. It's his story, not mine.
Exactly. So, yeah. Yeah. So you did it though. You did it during the pandemic. He said you did it on Zoom. Mostly.
the bulk of it, when the pandemic first hit, we were on a deadline to finish it much earlier than it came out, but it got pushed back again because of supply chain issues and all those other things.
Right. Yeah.
So we wanted to get a draft in 2020, and he was in London because he got stuck there. He was on the road when the pandemic
Glenn Matlock. I know.
At Glenn's
house. I know.
So we would Zoom. We would set, like 2 or 3 times a week where we would Zoom basically until he got, he pooped out. We would just talk.
Yeah.
And I would just, I'd say, okay, well, tell me about your first guitar. Tell me about the first band you were in. Tell me about, it was like that. And, most of the stories I knew already. Mm-hmm. There wasn't anything that was really a revelation, but I wanted to get it in his words, in his voice.
Right. Yeah.
And so then it just became the idea of trying to sculpt a narrative and create a beginning, middle, and end that kind of, is, I think the biggest thing for me was for it to move, for it not to drag and for it not to be boring and, whatever. And there's a fine line there. I think the first version that we turned in was well over 100,000 words. And the publisher said, this is too much about guitars. Two guitarists writing about guitars.
Right. Okay.
And then we made all his edits that he suggested. And then it was only like 25 or 30,000 words, which isn't even a book. So he's like, okay, we got to split the difference. Maybe you should add back in. And then I think we got it to where it was maybe, 75, 80,000 words, which is sort of book length. Okay. And it felt better, because then it felt like it really, it told the story, but it didn't get bogged down in any one era. If there were stories, particularly with regard to David Bowie or to John Lennon, that felt like they needed more, then, we were happy. Like there was one editorial call with the publisher, and he had chopped the chapter on John Lennon on Making Double Fantasy from about 5,000 or 6,000 words down to like 1,500 words. And I said, look, a lot of people are going to buy this just for that chapter.
Right? Exactly.
You've got to give them,
right.
That he had a secret stash of chocolate or, whatever it was,
Right.
And I think that stuff is really important. And again, there was a chapter on the making of David Bowie's The Next Day, which is the last time they worked together.
Yeah.
And he had made a lot of cuts. And I said, look, I'm not changing this. I feel like people want to know where David bought his biscotti and where Slick bought the
Right,
coffee, and where, I just feel like that's, the people who are going to plunk down the $30 or whatever for this book, they want that. They want that information. Maybe you know it, maybe you do think it slows it down, but I disagree. I think those. So I stood up for a few things as a fan, right?
Right.
Like, I'm a fan of these guys
Right.
and that era and these people and Slick. And so I wanted as much information as possible. And
Right.
John Lennon in particular, because it was such a brief moment in time and there were so many plans and then he was gone.
I know, right.
So I thought that was really, really crucial for him to be, as present as possible.
Mm-hmm. And that documentary's coming out May 4th, I think, or 2nd in London about John Lennon.
No, the one-to-one documentary is coming out April 11th, right?
There's an April. Which one?
The one-to-one documentary about John's concert at the Garden and his political activism when he moved to New York City.
Oh, I don't know about that one. I'm talking about.
You're talking about the Alan Parker one.
Yeah, right. I'm talking about the one that's coming out May 2nd, I think, in London.
Right.
About
so
his last year that Slick is in.
I believe, Slick is in that one too.
Yeah, he's in that. And he's in the trailer too.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw it recently. It's it's amazing. Alan was able to corral a lot of people who we've never heard from before, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I hope it comes to the States soon because I don't know when it's. Well, it'll come here. It'll be here, I'm sure.
It will. It will.
So anyway, since we're discussing Slick still, I want to show this video of the two of you playing at his house.
Okay.
Okay, hold it. Okay, I'm going to get us off here for a minute. Hold on one sec. Okay.
Standing in your hallway, looking in your eyes, feeling all your love, telling all the lies. I took your love, I took everything, and in return I gave you nothing. Lying in your bed, with mom around you, feeling your heart beating, telling all those lies. I took your love, I took everything, and in return I gave you nothing. Heartbreak, yeah, heartbreak, yeah, heartbreak, yeah, heartbreak. But you gotta live life like you're gonna die. You gotta make the choices that will change your life. Looking at your picture, waiting for your call, trying to find the courage, facing all those lies. I took your love, I took everything, and in return I gave you nothing. But heartbreak, gotta live life like you're gonna die. You gotta take the chances that will change your life and your heartbreak. Yeah, heartbreak. Yeah, heartbreak. Yeah, heartbreak.
Oops. Wait a minute. What happened here? Wait a minute. Okay. That
Here
was
I am.
great. Here you are. Okay, good. Anyway, that was great. I really
Thanks.
enjoyed that.
Yeah.
That was fun to see. Thanks for sending that.
Of course.
That was good. So anyway, okay. So on to Bob Dylan. Since I've been doing a Bob Dylan series, people who knew Bob Dylan.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're one of the few people I think who's been able to interview him. He doesn't do a lot of interviews, correct?
Since 2001 or so, I think he's done 6.
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
So, but
One
you,
of them being mine. So yeah.
right.
So
I mean,
5.
that's amazing. That's really
It's amazing.
amazing.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. And so I did read the transcript. It was fascinating to read.
It's fascinating. Yeah. I
It
know.
was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was it like though, interviewing him?
You know, when you're doing it, when you know, it's harder to prep for or think about ahead of time or, you know, deal with all the logistics. I think once you're doing it, or for me, it just sort of happens, right? It's not, and by the way,
What's your job? I mean, you're used to doing it, but it's
yeah,
like, you
but
know,
it's also, you know, I'm very comfortable with musicians. I don't worry about what I'm asking. You know, I know his manager really well, and I gave Bob a sense of the questions beforehand, so
okay.
it was he'd know the ballpark of things because you know he doesn't want to get in there and be asked about Blowing in the Wind or something. So
Right.
you know, but it was really easy. You know, he was super engaged. The answers are fascinating.
They really are.
He's clearly, you know, really aware of the world around him still,
Yes.
and
Hmm.
you know, thinks about it all a lot. But you know,
Right.
by the same token, I have to say, I'm not really. It's one of those things where it's like when you interview the president or you know a prime minister or I don't know George Clooney or something. I'm not supposed to talk about it. I mean, there are certain things I can tell because they're not really telling any secrets, but it's, you know, I think, I think the idea certainly that I got from Bob's office was that they wanted the interview to stand for itself. You know, they didn't want me or anybody out there explaining it, although everybody seemed to have an opinion about it. But, you know, I think the general reaction was good because of that, because, you know, he wasn't clarifying. I wasn't on a million podcasts. It was just like what he said was what he said. And, you know, people could then kind of dig in and there was a lot of, you know, it's like, I don't know, it was like 10,000 words or 8,000, you know, it's a lot of information. And it's mostly
Yeah,
him.
it was a
You know,
lot. Yeah.
it's not mostly me. I tend to talk a lot in my interviews and you know, it was very much focused on, see, it was weird. The way it got sold, he didn't really want to do an interview, but when you have a book out like he did, The Philosophy of Modern Song, you
Right.
have to do some promotion. Like it's part
Right.
of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said to his manager, just as a joke, because I had said it many times over the years, well, why doesn't he do the gear and gadgets interview for the Wall Street Journal that I've done? And it was just because it's a tech column and it's also,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you can talk about anything. It can be retrospective. And so it was just sort of bonkers enough that he thought Bob would agree. And he did. He liked that
Oh,
idea.
okay. Okay.
You
Okay.
know, so I think
Uh-huh.
part of it was he wasn't going to be sitting down for like CBS Sunday Morning, lots of makeup and lights, and the whole day was shot. It was, you know, it was like, it was going to be just less than an hour of his life and it would be over with, you know?
Right.
And so I think, you know, it worked out, certainly worked out for me, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
it was one of those things I thought would never happen. You know,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
like, I would ask anytime he was putting something out, I would mention it to his manager, like, hey, I'd love to interview Bob. And,
Right.
you know, it was always a hard no. And I know people who ask him all the time and it's always a hard no.
Right.
And you know, this one time, because I caught him at the right moment, it was
Right.
not a hard no. So it was pretty amazing. It was pretty,
That's
you know,
great. It is amazing. It is amazing. And
You
it
know,
was
what
amazing to read it too.
what else can I say? You know,
I
it's
know.
fun.
Well,
It's
you're very
completely
fortunate.
Bob.
Well, you're so talented. So
You know, I think his, you know, I'm, it was a little bit of a fix because I'm pretty good friends with his manager, but
Right.
I think his manager knows my sensibility and he knew I wasn't going to be an idiot, right? He knew the questions were going to be not what everybody wants to ask Bob Dylan, that they were going to be about the book and also about sort of technology and the way Bob views the world and, you know, Spotify, you know, things like this that I don't think most journalists, their editors are going to tell them what to ask him. And that's where you get into trouble. You get into the, like, you know, well, what was it like to write like Rolling Stone? I mean, that's
right.
you know,
Right.
you can't ask
You
him.
can't ask him that. It's
You
like,
know, it's also
yeah.
not a good question.
Right. Right.
So yeah.
So
I
how?
guess
Okay. So that's great. It's really amazing. So so you've been a music journalist since 2013.
yeah, roughly. No. I mean, yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, I think I dabbled with it. You know, my band stopped touring in like 2005 or 6, and my kids were little, and I couldn't go out on the road.
Okay.
So I think I think I kind of geared up toward it around that time, because it was a way for me to stay in the business, not go out on the road. And
Okay.
you know, I knew a lot of musicians. I had a pretty formidable Rolodex to kind of call up. You know, I mean, some of the first interviews I did were like Ringo and Jimmy Page and Elton John and, you know, like
Really?
that. So, yeah.
Oh, you had
yeah.
that. Oh, you met them what when you were doing?
Well, I knew I had met, you know, I had never met Elton, but I had certainly met Ringo many times, and I'd met Jimmy Page in passing a few times. But they were just, you know, it was easy. You know, I knew Ringo's son through, because I had worked with Pete Townshend, so I knew him because he drums with the Who.
Okay.
So I was able to sort of get from how do I get to Ringo? You know, there's a woman who handles all this stuff, and you send her a request. But, you know, I think when you come through sort of friends and family, you know, she knew I knew Pete, and she knew I knew Zach, and, you know,
Right. Right. Yeah.
I think it's treated maybe a little differently, and
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
so, you know, in that first couple of years, I interviewed Ringo many times, and he was always great, you know, like really, really easy to deal with. And I've seen him give interviews. I've been present when he's given interviews where he just gets irritated because all the people want to talk about is Hard Day's Night, or, you know, whatever, something that happened a lifetime ago, literally.
Right.
You know, same as Bob, you know. And I think one of the great rules is with anybody, you know, people who have asked me about interviewing Ringo in particular, you know, don't ask about the Beatles. If
Right.
you're talking about music with Ringo Starr, he's going to bring up the Beatles. His frame of reference for music is being in the Beatles.
Right.
So
Right.
at the very least, he's going to bring up, you know, John or Paul or George individually. And so then you're kind of, the door is open, and it's much easier because he's made that, you know, he's allowed it, right? And I think that's always, you know, not every, you know, look, I generally have the luxury of time with these guys. You know, I mean, I probably, over the 10 or 12 times I've interviewed Jimmy Page, I've probably spent 20 hours with him. I mean, that, you know, that's
Really?
that's a real luxury, right? You know, certainly 15. And I think,
What, just like hanging out with him?
it's, yeah, I mean, there was the last time, well, not the last time I interviewed him, but when he was doing all the Led Zeppelin reissues about 10 years ago, so maybe 2016 or 17, I interviewed him about the Coda and the last batch. And I just went to his hotel room and we just had coffee and lunch. And, that was probably, I don't know, it was at least 3 hours. We just spent the afternoon together, and so there wasn't like a beginning, middle, and end. We were just talking. And I just recorded the conversation and then took the stuff that wasn't off the record. And that was the interview. But,
Right.
A lot of it's just, it was the same as, I spent quite a bit of time with Jeff Beck and spent a day with him actually for a piece.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
We hung out in his hotel room and talked guitars. And,
That's great.
we talked about the Jeff Beck group. But, a lot of that stuff was just not for publication. It was just two guys talking about Telecasters or whatever. And so, that I think that most of the time I come recommended or through someone else so that the artist knows a little bit about me. So they know I'm not a journalist first.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they feel as though I'm just
You're a musician for, yeah.
I'm a musician first, and they're going to be treated respectfully.
Right.
I know what I'm talking about. I know their career.
Right.
I'm not going to ask dumb questions. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to ask superficial questions. I'm really going to try to engage them in a conversation. I think, but I do that with anybody. I interviewed Dick Cavett, and he said to me 2/3 of the way through, he was like, "How old are you?" And I told him, and he said, "Did you watch my show when you were a kid? Because you interview the way I used to interview." I think it's really important to go in being curious, but not to have, like, I almost never have a list of questions. I know the subject going in. I have a rough outline in my brain, but if they want to go somewhere else, I'm happy to do that. And if you know your subject well enough, you can go wherever they want to go. And I think that's really important.
Well, I enjoy doing a lot of research on people. I love doing it.
It's interesting.
It's
you learn
fascinating.
stuff you would not learn other. This was one of the funniest parts of my interviews. The first time I interviewed Jimmy Page, I'm not a huge Zeppelin fan. I'm not a Zeppelin fan. They were my brother's band much more than mine growing up, and so I'm aware of them. But when we were talking about his catalog, and I told him that, we were talking about bootlegs, and he said, "Well, how many Led Zeppelin bootlegs do you have?" And at the time, I knew because I had them all on a hard drive, and you can have a number. It tells you how many you have. And I said, "Well, I think I have 256." And he said, "I don't even have 256 Led Zeppelin bootlegs." He's like, "How do you say you're not a fan?" I said, "Well, you're Led Zeppelin. Like if I'm a writer and I'm a fan and I'm a songwriter and a musician, whether or not I'm a fan, you're Led Zeppelin. I want to know what made you tick. I want to know how you did it. I want to know why you did it. I want to know where it came from. And I also want to get down to the source material to go back to Howlin' Wolf or whatever, and all of that. So it's not about not being a fan. It's about having respect for the artistry more than anything else. So I think we seem to agree on that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, so I've heard some interviewers don't really do a deep dive, but I don't know I don't know. I love doing it. I mean, I love learning about.
A lot of people don't have the time.
They don't have the time, right?
Or they're just.
It's a lot of work. It is a lot of work.
Or they're just not a fan, or they've been assigned it by an editor or somebody.
Right.
And I think that's fine, but I think if I'm looking for interviews with a person just as a fan, I can tell in the first minute or two if it's going to be worth watching. Because if they're just asking bullet point questions, the artist is not going to really engage, and they're just going to give the answers they give everybody. Right. But if you can engage them, you're going to get them into a conversation, and you never know where that's going to go.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, to wrap this up, is there anything else that you want to mention? Is there anything else you want to say?
Well, we're still promoting the current album, The Last Day of Summer.
Right.
I'm trying to finish up. Back in the 90s, I did a bunch of recording sessions that Pete Townshend was the executive producer on. He funded them, and I used his band, and his brother helped me with the writing and production and all that. And we only ever put out 3 of the songs, but we found, because the tapes, I didn't have the tapes until very recently, and it turns out there were 10 songs. So we're trying to, and they're from mid 90s. So we're finishing that up, and we're going to put that out on Schnitzel Records, and hopefully there will be a single for Record Store Day maybe this fall, and then a full album of them in, 26, right? A whole vinyl record will come out. So it's, and that gives me a minute to kind of figure out the next record, because I feel, I think it's hard to follow a record. Your reaction to The Last Day of Summer is it's your best record. It's my favorite record. It's, I listen to it all the time. Blah, blah, blah. You don't want to put something out that does a disservice to the artistry that you've reached, yet you don't want to be intimidated by what you've done before. So I just want to make sure, I had the luxury of time during the pandemic to write a lot of songs and pick, and sort of pick the best, and so I'm trying to give myself that luxury again, like not set a deadline and not put out a record right away, because, I can tour this record, promote this record for at least another year. And then the Townshend record will give me hopefully another year. And then there'll be another, and then there'll be another record to come. And, there's also, Slick and I have been invited to record over at Paul Weller's studio over in England. And I want to do that. I want to take advantage of that. We weren't able to include him on this record, and I want to do that. So
that would be great.
Yeah, I think it's I'm a huge fan of his. I followed him my whole life. We've become friends in the last 10 or 15 years, and I think it would be stupid of me not to, even if nothing comes of it,
just to do it with him.
Yeah. And I've played with his whole band, and we've known each other a long time. There's no weirdness about it. It's just, it's just a great opportunity. And he's got a beautiful studio. We can stay there for a couple of days and just sort of see. Yeah.
When are you doing that? We haven't set a date yet.
Well, when I'm not on the road, when Slick's not on the road,
when you both can do it.
Yeah. So these are these are very difficult things to schedule. But
exactly. I know.
Yeah, but
at the right time, you'll do it.
It will happen. And the other thing is, I don't want to go there until I have a batch of songs that I feel are worth, bringing to that table. There's also an opportunity to work with Daniel Lanois, who's produced, U2 and Bob Dylan and Paris and whatever.
That's great.
And again, I've kept in contact with him, but he mentioned that more than a year ago, and everybody's like, oh, you got to jump on that. He's going to forget. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to go out there with shitty songs. I want it to be worth his time too.
Right.
So I want him to want to work with me. I don't want to bring something to the table that isn't of the caliber he's used to. So, I've got a couple of ideas, but I want to have more than 3. I want to, because if he says, well, this one's okay, but I don't like these other 2, I don't want to say that's all I got.
Well, that sounds great.
Yeah.
So that's exciting.
It's very exciting. A lot of doors have opened that, look, I believe you can manifest these opportunities. And I think that if you engage with people and you work hard and you try to really be the best artist you can possibly be, then people will recognize that. And while the record buying public doesn't exist the way it did even 10 or 15 years ago, there are still people out there whose work I respect, who I have an association with or a relationship or whatever. And I can say, hey, I've got this. Would you want to do something together? And that's exactly how The Last Day of Summer worked. It was, I didn't have bass on this track that Slick and I were doing. I was on the phone. It was the pandemic. I was on the phone with Duff McKagan. who it never occurred to me, because he's in Guns N' Roses, would be the guy to do it. But I sent it to him, and he knocked it out of the park. Of course he could do it. He's not just Guns N' Roses bass player. He's a musician.
Right.
So, so everybody, what they sent back blew my mind. And I think that was really, really a special experience. So why not ask these people? They're my friends.
That's great. Well, you have a great life. There's a lot of great things happening with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And, continued success. It's all great.
Thank you.
So I really appreciate you giving me time on my show.
No. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you promoting the show. And, people, if they want to keep up, they can go to jeffslatehq.com, or I'm all over social media, and I'm always, or just come up to me after a show. I love meeting people and hearing, that I love it. They don't even have to be a fan. They can just say they love the music that I love too. And we share that. Or, I write a lot. I'm very opinionated. Not everybody agrees with my opinion. I've had people come up to me and, want to take me out of the parking lot and fight about it. So and I'm happy to do that too. I love, I miss the days when musicians and our, rock stars, our artists had opinions. There aren't enough John Lennons and Joe Strummers and those kind of people. And I think, everybody's afraid of offending the corporate powers or the fan base or the this or the that.
Correct.
And I find, look, during the pandemic, I did weekly Facebook and Instagram concerts, and I did not hide the fact that of what my politics was, where I stood on COVID and masks, and where I stood on vaccines, and where I stood as the time progressed on the social justice causes that I was raising money for when all the George Floyd stuff happened. And I think, there were people I know who were no longer fans of mine because of that. But I also know that I got messages from people who disagreed, but were okay because they respected the fact that I had an opinion. It was deeply held and well-reasoned, even if they disagreed. So, I think that's, I didn't know John. I did know Joe Strummer a bit. Those people should be our role models. Everybody should have a little bit of a revolutionary in them. You don't become a musician to not be a rebel, right? Slick and I joke about this all the time. Like, what would we do if we had to get a straight job and work in an office? Well, we couldn't function. We couldn't do that. The same way, if you took somebody out of, who'd worked a job where they get a paycheck every week, it would be very hard for them to go on the road. Right?
Exactly.
They'd be like, oh my God, this is awful.
Right.
And whereas we feel great doing that. So I think that's I think we should be mouthy. We should shoot our mouths off. We should offend people once in a while.
Okay, good. Well, we have to do what feels right. And you have to do, you just have to do what feels right for you. So anyway, it was really great to talk to you.
Thank you.
And to find out more about your life.
Yeah.
All the good things you're doing.
Yeah, you did a lot of research.
I do. Anyway, thanks again, Jeff. It's been a real pleasure, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Okay. Anyway, whoever's still on live, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. Jeff's fascinating and so talented. And keep smiling, keep sweet. Join the smile revolution. It's not easy, but we can focus on the good and be grateful for all the good. There's always good going on. So lots of love, and stay tuned till my next show next Monday at 8 Eastern Time. Lots of love. Bye. It's called the smile.